My daughter-in-law abandoned her autistic son 8 years ago. I don't have time for this nonsense, she screamed. I raised him alone. After my husband's death, we discovered a secret in the old garage he was set to inherit. When we sold the collection of old cars, my DIL returned with a lawyer, demanding custody of her son and the money. I panicked. Our lawyer said, "It's a lost cause. The law is on her side." But then, my grandson whispered something in my ear. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I still remember the sound of that door slamming 8 years ago. Not just the physical bang of wood against frame, but the way it echoed through our house, through Porter's confused 7-year-old mind, and straight into my heart where it's been reverberating ever since. I don't have time for this nonsense. Lenny had screamed, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my grandson like he was some broken appliance she was tired of dealing with. Porter stood frozen in the living room, clutching his favorite blue truck, his dark eyes wide with that particular kind of confusion that only comes when your world suddenly stops making sense. My name is Maxine, and I'm 63 years old. I never imagined that at this stage of my life I'd be raising a child again, especially one with autism. But when your daughter-in-law abandons her son because he doesn't fit into her idea of a perfect life, you don't really have a choice. You step up, or you watch a child suffer. That morning started like any other. Porter had been having one of his difficult days, the kind where sounds seemed too loud and textures felt wrong against his skin. He'd refused to put on his school clothes, insisting they were scratchy, and had spent 20 minutes arranging his toy cars in a specific pattern on the kitchen floor. Lainey had been pacing back and forth, checking her phone, sighing dramatically every few seconds. "He's making us late again," she muttered, though I noticed she said us, like she was actually planning to take him to school herself, which she rarely did. That was usually my job, too. I tried to help Porter with his morning routine, speaking in the calm, steady voice I'd learned worked best with him. "Porter, sweetie, let's try the soft blue shirt today. Remember how comfortable it felt yesterday?" He looked up at me with those enormous brown eyes, so much like his father's, and slowly nodded. It took another 15 minutes, but we managed to get him dressed and ready. I was feeling proud of our small victory when Lenny exploded. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, startling Porter so badly he dropped his truck. "I can't live like this anymore. I'm 28 years old, Maxine. I should be able to leave my house when I want to, wear the clothes I want to wear, go places without having to worry about whether the music will be too loud or if there'll be crowds." Porter began to rock slightly, a self-soothing behavior I'd grown to recognize. I moved toward him instinctively, but Lenny stepped between us. "No, don't you dare coddle him. That's exactly the problem. You and my husband, always making excuses, always accommodating. Well, I'm done accommodating." The next few minutes felt like watching a car accident in slow motion. Lenny stormed upstairs and came back down with 2 large suitcases. Porter and I stood there, both of us trying to process what was happening. "Mommy?" Porter's voice was small, uncertain. "Where are you going?" Lenny didn't even look at him. She was checking her phone again, probably calling someone to pick her up. "I'm going somewhere I can have a normal life," she said coldly. "Somewhere I don't have to pretend to care about your little quirks and your special needs." That's when my heart broke completely. Not for me, but for this little boy who was hearing his mother say she didn't want him because of something he couldn't control. "Lenny, please," I tried, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's your son." She finally looked at Porter then, and the expression on her face was something I'll never forget. Pure irritation, like he was an inconvenience she'd finally worked up the courage to eliminate. "He's not my problem anymore," she said. "I didn't sign up for this. When I married his father, nobody told me I'd be dealing with a kid who can't even handle normal life. You want him so much? You can have him." A car honked outside. Lenny grabbed her suitcases and headed for the door. "Don't try to contact me," she called over her shoulder. "I'm starting over." And then she was gone. Porter stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, still holding his position near the toy cars he'd arranged so carefully. Then very quietly he asked, "Is Mommy coming back for dinner?" I knelt down beside him, my knees creaking in protest, and pulled him into my arms. He was stiff at first, the way he always was with unexpected physical contact, but then he melted against me, and I felt his small body shaking. "I don't know, sweetheart," I whispered into his hair, "but I'm here, Grandma's here, and I'm not going anywhere." That was the day I became a mother again at 55. The day I learned that love doesn't always come in the form you expect, and that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in the moments when everything else falls apart. The weeks that followed were harder than anything I'd experienced since raising my own son. Porter kept asking when his mother was coming home, kept setting a place for her at dinner, kept drawing pictures of their family with her included. Each time, I had to find new ways to explain that some people leave and don't come back, without destroying his faith in the adults who remained. But we adapted. Children are remarkably resilient, especially when they feel safe and loved. Porter began to relax into our routines. He started sleeping through the night again. His meltdowns became less frequent, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to trust that when I said I'd be there, I meant it. 8 years have passed since that terrible morning. Porter is 15 now, a thoughtful, intelligent young man who sees the world differently than most people, but who has taught me more about patience, love, and resilience than I ever thought possible. Which is why what happened last week feels like such a betrayal. Just when I thought we were safe, just when I thought we'd built something unshakable together, the past came knocking on our door again. And this time, it brought a lawyer. My husband Harold died 3 months ago, and I thought the worst of our grief was behind us. Porter had handled the loss better than I'd expected, in his own quiet way. He'd started leaving small drawings of his grandfather on Harold's workbench in the old garage, and every morning he'd spend a few minutes out there, just sitting quietly among the tools and the dust. It was Porter who found the first clue. "Grandma," he said one afternoon, appearing in my kitchen doorway with that serious expression he gets when something has captured his attention completely. "There's something strange about Grandpa's cars. Harold had always been a collector of sorts, though I'd never paid much attention to his hobby. The garage behind our house was filled with old automobiles in various states of repair, covered by tarps and gathering dust. He'd tinker with them on weekends, claiming he was going to restore them someday, but they mostly just sat there taking up space." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, looking up from the bills I was sorting through. Harold's funeral expenses had stretched our budget thin, and I was trying to figure out how to make ends meet on my Social Security alone. Porter shifted from foot to foot, a sign that he was processing something complex. "The numbers don't match," he said finally. "The license plates, the registration papers in Grandpa's desk, they're all for really old cars, but really old cars in good condition are worth a lot of money." I set down the stack of bills and really looked at him. Porter has this gift for noticing details that most people miss, patterns that aren't obvious to the rest of us. When he was younger, I used to think it was just part of his autism, but as he's gotten older, I've realized it's actually a remarkable ability. "Show me," I said. We walked out to the garage together, Porter leading the way with purpose. He pulled back one of the tarps, revealing a sleek black car that even I could tell was something special. "This is a 1967 Shelby Cobra," he said matter-of-factly. "I looked it up online. If it's real, and if it's in good condition, it could be worth between $500,000 and $1 million. My legs felt weak. "Porter, that can't be right." But he was already moving to the next car, pulling away another tarp. "This one's a 1970 Plymouth Hemi-Cuda, also very rare. And this one," he moved to a third vehicle, "is a 1969 Dodge Daytona." I stared at the cars, really seeing them for the first time. Under all that dust and those protective covers, they were beautiful, pristine even. How had Harold afforded these? When had he bought them? And why had he never told me what they were worth? "Porter, are you absolutely sure about this?" He nodded solemnly. "I've been researching for 3 days. Grandpa had really good taste and really good hiding skills." The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls and appointments. Classic car appraisers came to the house, their eyes lighting up when they saw Harold's collection. Auction house representatives followed, each one more excited than the last. The final total was staggering, $18 million. $18 million that Harold had never mentioned, sitting in our garage for who knows how many years while I worried about grocery money and Porter's therapy bills. I should have been purely happy. Porter's future was secure now. College, if he wanted it. A house of his own someday. All the support services he might need as an adult. For the first time since becoming his guardian, I could stop worrying about what would happen to him when I was gone. But happiness quickly turned to terror when Lenny showed up. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after we'd received the appraisal results. I was in the kitchen making Porter's breakfast when I heard a car pull into our driveway. Through the window, I saw a sleek silver sedan, and my stomach dropped when I recognized the woman getting out of the passenger side. Lenny looked exactly the same as she had 8 years ago. Same blonde hair, same expensive clothes, same air of self-importance. But now, she had a companion, a man in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. I opened the door before they could knock, hoping to keep Porter from seeing them. He was upstairs getting ready for his tutoring session, and I wanted to keep it that way. "Hello, Maxine," Lenny said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "May we come in?" "No," I said firmly. "Whatever you want, you can say it from there." The man in the suit stepped forward. "Mrs. Hamilton, my name is Richard Chen, and I represent Ms. Lenny Richardson in a custody matter regarding her son, Porter Hamilton." My heart started racing. Porter is not a matter. He's a person. And you, I looked directly at Lenny, gave up any right to call him your son 8 years ago. Lenny's facade slipped slightly, revealing a flash of the coldness I remembered. "I was young and overwhelmed," she said. "People make mistakes. I've grown up now, and I want my son back." "Your timing is interesting," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. 8 years of silence, and suddenly you want to be a mother again, right after Porter inherits a substantial amount of money. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ms. Richardson has been informed of the inheritance, yes, but her desire to reconnect with her son isn't financially motivated. She's been seeking therapy, working on herself, preparing to be the mother Porter deserves." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Porter doesn't even remember you. Do you understand that? He stopped asking about you years ago. He's thriving, he's happy, he's healthy. And you want to disrupt all of that because suddenly he's valuable to you?" "He's my son," Lenny said, and there was steel in her voice now. "Legally, biologically, he's mine, and I have every right to claim custody." The lawyer nodded. "Massachusetts law is very clear about parental rights, Ms. Richardson never formally relinquished custody. She simply left the child in your care temporarily. Now she's ready to resume her parental responsibilities." "Temporarily?" I was shouting now, I realized. 8 years is not temporary. "From a legal standpoint," the lawyer continued calmly, "the length of time is less relevant than the formal procedures. Ms. Richardson is prepared to file for full custody immediately. She's also prepared to argue that a 15-year-old boy needs his mother more than his elderly grandmother." Elderly. The word hit me like a slap. At 63, was I too old to care for Porter? Would a judge see it that way? That afternoon, I called every lawyer I could find. The consultations were all depressingly similar. Without formal adoption papers, without any legal documentation of abandonment, my position was weak. Porter was a minor, and in the eyes of the law, his biological mother had stronger rights than his grandmother, no matter how long she'd been absent. "It's a difficult case," my lawyer, Mrs. Patricia Wells, explained during our meeting that Friday. "The court will consider what's in Porter's best interests, but parental rights are given significant weight. Unless we can prove she's unfit, or unless Porter himself expresses a strong preference to stay with you, the odds aren't in our favor. I sat in her office, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Everything I'd built with Porter, everything we'd overcome together, could be swept away by legal technicalities and a woman who'd shown up with dollar signs in her eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Porter upstairs in his room, safe and content, completely unaware that his world might be about to change again. How could I tell him that the mother who'd abandoned him was coming back? How could I explain that love and commitment might not be enough to keep us together? I was sitting at my kitchen table at 3 a.m, staring at a cold cup of coffee, when Porter appeared in the doorway. He was wearing his favorite pajamas, the ones with the stars on them, and his hair was sticking up in the back the way it always did when he'd been sleeping. "Grandma, are you okay?" I tried to smile, but I could feel tears threatening. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just couldn't sleep." He studied my face with that intense focus of his, and I realized there was no point in trying to hide my distress. Porter had always been able to read people's emotions better than most. "Something's wrong," he said, not a question but a statement. I patted the chair next to me, and he sat down, his legs swinging slightly because his feet didn't quite touch the floor yet. "Porter," I began carefully, "do you remember your mother at all?" His expression didn't change, but I saw his hands tighten slightly in his lap. "The lady who used to live here?" "Yes, she wants to see you again." Porter was quiet for a long moment, processing this information the way he processed everything, thoroughly and carefully. Finally, he looked up at me, and in his dark eyes I saw a wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "Does she want to see me, or does she want the money?" The question caught me off guard, both because of its perceptiveness and because of how matter-of-factly he asked it. "What makes you ask that?" Porter shrugged. "She left right after I was diagnosed. She came back right after we found the cars. I may be autistic, Grandma, but I'm not stupid." That's when I knew that no matter what the lawyers said, no matter what the courts decided, Porter and I were going to fight this together. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon you have isn't legal precedent or parental rights. Sometimes it's the truth. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday, and I spent the entire week feeling like I was drowning. Every legal consultation gave me the same devastating news. Without formal adoption papers or documented proof of abandonment, Lenny had an excellent chance of winning. The fact that she'd left Porter with family rather than strangers actually worked in her favor, according to the lawyers. It showed responsible decision-making during a difficult time. I wanted to scream every time I heard that phrase. Porter seemed to sense the tension in the house, though I tried my best to shield him from the worst of it. He'd always been sensitive to changes in routine and atmosphere, and I could see him watching me more carefully than usual, his dark eyes tracking my movements with that intense focus he got when he was trying to solve a puzzle. It was Tuesday evening when everything changed. I was sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Wells, my lawyer, going over our strategy for the hearing. We'd decided to focus on Porter's stability and progress over the past 8 years, hoping to convince the judge that disrupting his life now would be harmful. "The problem is," Mrs. Wells was saying, 15 is old enough for the court to take his preferences into account, but not old enough for him to have complete autonomy. If he expresses a desire to stay with you, it will help, but it won't guarantee anything. That's when Porter appeared in the doorway, holding something in his hands. It took me a moment to recognize what it was, an old digital recorder that had belonged to his grandfather, one of those devices Harold used to use for his work notes. "Porter, sweetheart, Mrs. Wells and I are having an important conversation," I said gently. "I know," he said, his voice serious. "That's why I need to show you this." He walked over to the table and set the recorder down carefully. Mrs. Wells looked puzzled, but something in Porter's expression made me pay attention. "What is it, honey?" Porter's hands were trembling slightly, which they did when he was nervous or excited. "I've been recording things," he said, "since I was little. It helps me remember conversations and understand what people really mean when they say things that don't make sense to me. Mrs. Wells leaned forward, her professional interest clearly piqued. What kind of things, Porter? Phone calls, he said simply. Visits. Conversations when people think I'm not listening or when they think I don't understand what they're talking about. My heart began to race. Porter, what are you trying to tell us? He pressed a button on the recorder, and suddenly the kitchen was filled with a voice I recognized but hadn't heard in years. Lenny's voice, but younger, more volatile than the controlled woman who'd showed up at my door with a lawyer. The recording was crackling and distant, but clear enough to understand. Porter must have been very young when he made it, maybe 8 or 9 years old. I can't do this anymore, Mom, Lenny was saying, presumably talking to her own mother on the phone. He's getting worse, not better. The therapy isn't working. The doctors keep saying he'll improve, but I don't see it. I see a kid who's never going to be normal, who's never going to be able to live independently, and I'm supposed to sacrifice my entire life for that? There was a pause. Then Lenny's voice continued, harder now. No, I'm not being dramatic. Do you know what it's like to have a child who can't handle normal social situations? Who melts down in grocery stores? Who needs everything to be exactly the same every single day? I'm 28 years old, and I feel like I'm in prison. Mrs. Wells was taking notes furiously, but I couldn't look away from Porter's face. He was staring at the recorder with that same intense concentration, as if he was hearing the words for the first time, even though he must have listened to this recording many times over the years. The recording continued. Harold keeps saying I need to be patient, that Porter just needs more time and understanding. And Maxine acts like I'm some kind of monster for not being naturally maternal with a special needs kid. But they don't understand what this is doing to my marriage, to my mental health, to my entire future. Another pause, longer this time. I've been thinking about leaving for months, Lenny's voice said finally. Just packing up and going somewhere I can start over, be a normal person again. Tom from work said his sister did the same thing when her kid was diagnosed with severe ADHD. She left him with the grandparents and moved to California. She's happy now. She's engaged to a guy who doesn't even know she has a kid. My blood ran cold. Porter pressed another button, and the recorder skipped forward to a different conversation, this one more recent based on the sound quality. Is he still living with the old lady? Lenny's voice asked. This recording was much clearer, like Porter had been closer to the phone. Yeah, still with his grandmother, a male voice responded. I didn't recognize it. Kid's 15 now, probably doesn't even remember you. Good, Lenny said, and the callousness in her voice made me flinch. That makes this easier. I just need to play the reformed mother angle long enough to get custody. Once I have legal control, I can put him in one of those residential facilities. There are some really nice ones, like boarding schools but for special needs kids. He'll be taken care of, and I'll be free to live my life. What about the money? The male voice asked. Lenny laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. The money is exactly why this is worth the hassle. $18 million, Tom. Even after paying for his care for the rest of his life, there'll be more than enough left over for us to do whatever we want. Travel, buy a house, start our own business. All I have to do is convince some judge that I'm a loving mother who made a mistake and learned from it. The recording ended, leaving the kitchen in absolute silence. Mrs. Wells was the first to speak. Porter, when did you make these recordings? The first one was about 6 months after she left, Porter said quietly. She used to call sometimes when she thought I was asleep or when I was having therapy sessions. I could hear her talking to Grandma, and I could tell Grandma was upset afterward, so I started recording the calls. And the second recording? Last week, she called a number that wasn't ours, but the call got forwarded to our house by mistake. I think she was trying to reach someone named Tom. The call only lasted a few minutes before she realized and hung up, but I recorded it. I stared at my grandson, this remarkable young man who'd been quietly protecting both of us for years without me even knowing it. "Porter, why didn't you tell me about these before?" He looked down at his hands, which were still trembling slightly. I wasn't sure if they would help, and I wasn't sure if adults would believe me or if they'd think I was wrong to record people without permission. But when I saw how worried you were about the court thing, I thought maybe it was time. Mrs. Wells was practically vibrating with excitement. "Porter, these recordings are incredibly important. They show clear evidence of abandonment with intent, as well as current plans to institutionalize you against your best interests for financial gain. This changes everything." But I was focused on Porter, on the weight he'd been carrying alone for so many years. "Sweetheart, you've been protecting us this whole time, haven't you?" He nodded solemnly. I knew she didn't really want me. I could tell from the way she looked at me, even before she left. But I also knew that you did want me, and that you were scared someone might try to take me away. So I thought if I kept evidence of the truth, maybe someday it would be useful. The sophistication of his thinking, the emotional intelligence required to understand not just what was happening, but what might happen in the future, took my breath away. This wasn't just pattern recognition or attention to detail. This was strategic planning by a child who'd learned very early that he needed to protect himself and the people who truly loved him. "There's more," Porter said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small USB drive. I transferred all the recordings to this. There are about 23 different calls and conversations over the past 7 years. Some of them are her talking to friends about how glad she is to be free of me. Some are her talking to different men about how she's single and available because she doesn't have any kids. Mrs. Wells took the USB drive with hands that were actually shaking. "Porter, you may have just saved yourself and your grandmother a lot of heartache." But Porter wasn't done. "There's something else," he said, his voice getting quieter. "In one of the recordings, she talks about the cars. About how she knew Grandpa had valuable things in the garage and how she was angry that she couldn't figure out what they were before she left. She says she should have searched harder and that she wishes she'd waited to leave until after Grandpa died so she could have gotten her hands on whatever he was hiding." The room fell silent again as the implications of this sank in. Not only had Lenny abandoned Porter because of his autism, not only was she planning to institutionalize him now for the money, but she'd actually known there might be valuable assets and had regretted not being able to claim them years ago. "This proves premeditation," Mrs. Wells said grimly. "She didn't just happen to find out about the inheritance and decide to come back. She's been planning for something like this for years." I looked at Porter, my heart full of pride and sadness and fierce protectiveness all at once. "You've been so brave, sweetheart. Braver than any kid should have to be." He met my eyes with that steady, serious gaze. "I learned from you, Grandma. You've been protecting me my whole life. I just wanted to protect you too." As Mrs. Wells gathered up her papers and the USB drive, talking excitedly about how this new evidence would completely change our legal strategy, I pulled Porter into a hug. For once, he didn't stiffen or pull away. Instead, he melted into my arms the way he had that first day 8 years ago, when his world had fallen apart and I'd promised him I'd never leave. "We're going to be okay," I whispered into his hair. "I know," he whispered back. "I've been planning for this for a long time." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Porter's secret recordings hadn't just given us a legal advantage. They'd shown me that the boy I'd raised was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. Whatever happened in court, we would face it together, armed with the truth and the unbreakable bond we'd forged through years of quiet love and mutual protection. Mrs. Wells called me at 7:30 the next morning, her voice crackling with energy. "Maxine, you need to get down to my office as soon as possible. What Porter gave us last night is even more powerful than I initially thought." I found her surrounded by transcripts, legal documents, and her laptop open to what looked like social media profiles. She'd clearly been working since dawn. "I've been researching Lenny Richardson," she said without preamble. "Or should I say, Lenny Richardson Martinez Thompson. Richardson, your former daughter-in-law has been busy these past 8 years. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Mrs. Wells spread out a series of printed pages in front of me. She's been married 3 times since leaving your son and Porter. Each marriage lasted between 18 months and 2 years. Each one ended when her husband either had financial difficulties or when family complications arose. She pointed to the first document. Marriage number 1, Roberto Martinez, a widower with 2 young children. Divorced him when his ex-wife sued for increased alimony, claiming she couldn't handle the stress of his legal battles. The second page showed a different marriage certificate. Marriage number 2, David Thompson, whose elderly mother moved in with them after a hip surgery. Lenny filed for divorce 3 months later, citing irreconcilable differences regarding family obligations. And the third marriage? I asked, though I was beginning to see the pattern. James Richardson, her current husband's name, which is why she's using Richardson again. He's apparently wealthy enough that she kept his name, even though they're currently separated. And guess why they're separated? I waited, my hands clenched in my lap. His 16-year-old daughter from his first marriage was diagnosed with a chronic illness requiring long-term care. Lenny moved out 2 months after the diagnosis, claiming she needed space to think about their future. Mrs. Wells sat back in her chair, her expression grim. She has a documented pattern of abandoning relationships the moment they become inconvenient or require any kind of sacrifice on her part. But this gets worse. She opened her laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a Facebook profile I recognized as Lenny's, though the last name was different. Look at these posts from over the years, Mrs. Wells said, scrolling down. She's presented herself as childless in every single relationship. Look here, from 2 years ago. So grateful to have found someone who understands my desire to travel and live freely without the complications of children. She scrolled further. And this one, from 3 years ago. Finally in a relationship where we can be spontaneous and adventurous. No kids, no complications, just 2 people building a life together. My heart ached as I read post after post where Lenny had essentially erased Porter's existence. To her social media followers, to her friends, to her romantic partners, she was a carefree woman who'd never had children. But here's the really damning evidence, Mrs. Wells said, clicking to another document. I hired a private investigator yesterday to dig deeper into her current situation. James Richardson isn't just separated from Lenny, he's in the process of divorcing her. And according to the divorce papers, he's claiming she committed fraud by misrepresenting herself as childless and financially stable. What does that mean? It means she's about to lose whatever financial security she had with him. She owes money on credit cards he didn't know about, and she's been living beyond her means for years. The private investigator found evidence of significant debt in 3 different states. Mrs. Wells leaned forward, her eyes intense. Maxine, she's not just coming back for Porter because of the inheritance. She's coming back because she's desperate. She needs that money to survive, and she needs Porter's legal status to access it. I felt sick to my stomach. How could I not have known any of this? Because she's been very careful to cover her tracks. But Porter's recordings gave us the key to unlock all of this information. Once we knew what to look for, the pattern became clear. Mrs. Wells gathered up the documents and handed me a thick folder. I want you to take these home and read through everything. Tomorrow, we're going to file a counterpetition for permanent guardianship based on abandonment, fraud, and evidence of intent to institutionalize Porter against his best interests. What are our chances now? For the first time since this nightmare began, Mrs. Wells smiled. With this evidence, I'd say our chances are excellent. But there's something else we need to discuss. She pulled out one more document, this one from the private investigator's report. Lenny's lawyer, Richard Chen, has a reputation for taking cases on contingency in exchange for a percentage of any financial settlement. He's not being paid by Lenny. He's gambling on winning the case and getting a cut of Porter's inheritance. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. So everyone involved in trying to take Porter away from me is doing it for money? It appears that way. But here's what I think we should do. Instead of waiting for the custody hearing, I want to schedule a deposition. Get Lenny on the record, under oath, before she has a chance to prepare more elaborate lies. With Porter's recordings as evidence, we can ask very specific questions about her conversations and intentions. I thought about this for a moment. What would that accomplish? If she lies under oath, it's perjury. If she tells the truth, she admits to abandonment and financial motivation. Either way, we win. And with Porter's documented evidence, she won't be able to claim the recordings are fake or taken out of context. That afternoon, I drove home with the folder of evidence sitting heavy in my passenger seat. Porter was in the living room when I arrived, working on a complex puzzle that depicted the solar system. It was the kind of detailed, methodical work that helped him think and process emotions. "How did it go with Mrs. Wells?" he asked without looking up from the puzzle. I sat down on the couch near his workspace. "Porter, how much do you understand about what's happening with your mother's legal case?" He placed a piece representing Jupiter carefully in its spot before answering. "I understand that she wants custody of me to get access to Grandpa's money. I understand that she's been lying about wanting to be my mother again, and I understand that you're worried she might succeed." His matter-of-fact tone belied the complexity of the emotions we were both dealing with. "Are you worried too?" Porter considered this question the way he considered everything, thoroughly and honestly. "I was worried before I gave you the recordings. Now I'm not worried about her getting custody. I'm worried about something else." "What's that?" He looked up at me then, his dark eyes serious. "I'm worried about what this is doing to you. You haven't been sleeping well. You've been forgetting to eat lunch. And you keep looking at me like you're trying to memorize my face." The accuracy of his observations startled me. "I guess I have been doing that." "You don't need to," he said simply. "I'm not going anywhere. Even if the worst happened and a judge said I had to go with her, I wouldn't stay. I'm 15, not 5. I know who my real family is." I felt tears threatening again, but these were different tears than the ones I'd been crying for weeks. These were tears of pride and gratitude for this remarkable young man who'd somehow grown up wise and strong despite everything he'd endured. "Mrs. Wells found out some things about your mother," I said carefully. "About what she's been doing these past 8 years. It's not pretty." Porter nodded. "I figured it wouldn't be. People who abandon their children usually don't become better people. They just get better at hiding who they really are." That evening, as I was making dinner, Porter appeared in the kitchen with another revelation. "Grandma, there's something else I need to tell you about the recordings." I set down the wooden spoon I was using to stir the soup. "What is it, sweetheart? Some of them aren't just phone calls. Some of them are conversations she had when she came to visit." My heart stopped. "Visit? Porter, your mother never visited." "She did," he said quietly, 3 times. "But you weren't here. The first time was about 2 years after she left, when you were at your doctor's appointment. The second time was when you were grocery shopping about 4 years ago, and the third time was last year when you went to Aunt Susan's funeral." I stared at him, trying to process this information. "She came to the house when I wasn't here?" Porter nodded. "Each time she wanted to see if Grandpa was hiding anything valuable. She went through his desk, his closets, even the garage. She was looking for insurance papers, bank statements, anything that might tell her what he had. She never asked about me or how I was doing. She just searched the house and left." "Did she talk to you during these visits?" "Only to tell me not to mention that she'd been there. She said it would upset you and that adults had complicated relationships I wouldn't understand. But I recorded everything because I knew she was lying and I thought someday the truth might be important." Porter reached into his backpack and pulled out another USB drive. "Everything's on here, including the part where she tells me that when I turn 18, She's going to convince me to sign papers, giving her access to any money I inherit. She said I'd probably be grateful to have someone handle my finances since people like me aren't good with money. The casual cruelty of that statement, delivered to a child by his own mother, made my blood boil. But it also filled me with fierce determination. Lenny had underestimated Porter completely. She'd seen only his autism, not his intelligence. She'd assumed he was naive and easily manipulated, not realizing that he was actually one of the most perceptive people I'd ever known. "Porter," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "Tomorrow we're going to end this once and for all." He looked up at me with those wise, serious eyes. "Good," he said simply. "I'm ready." As I tucked him into bed that night, Porter asked me one more question. "Grandma, do you think she ever really loved me? Even a little bit?" The question broke my heart, but I knew he deserved an honest answer. I think she loved the idea of having a perfect child. But when you turned out to be real, with real needs and challenges, she couldn't handle it. "That's not about you, Porter. That's about her limitations as a person." Porter nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think it was my fault she left. But the recordings helped me understand that she would have found a reason to leave no matter what kind of child I was. Some people just aren't capable of real love." As I turned off his light and headed toward my own room, I marveled at the wisdom of this 15-year-old who'd spent years quietly gathering evidence to protect both of us. Tomorrow, we would use that evidence to ensure that Lenny could never hurt him again. But tonight, I was simply grateful for the privilege of being loved by someone as remarkable as Porter. The deposition was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Friday morning at Mrs. Wells's office. I arrived early, my stomach churning with nervous energy, but Porter seemed remarkably calm. He'd brought a small notebook and a pen, explaining that writing down his thoughts helped him stay focused during stressful situations. "Are you ready for this?" I asked him as we sat in the waiting room. "I've been ready for 8 years, he said simply. When Lenny arrived with Richard Chen, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished, confident woman who'd shown up at my door weeks ago. She looked tired, stressed, and significantly thinner. Her designer clothes were the same style as always, but they hung differently on her frame, as if she'd lost weight from anxiety. She glanced at Porter when she walked in, and I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe, at how much he'd grown, how much he'd changed from the confused 7-year-old she'd left behind. For just a moment, I thought I saw something that might have been regret, but it was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. "Hello, Porter," she said, her voice artificially bright. "You've gotten so tall." Porter looked up from his notebook and met her eyes directly. "Hello, Lenny," he said, deliberately not calling her mother. "Yes, people tend to grow when 8 years pass." The court reporter arrived, followed by Mrs. Wells, and we moved into the conference room. The formal atmosphere seemed to rattle Lenny, who kept glancing at her lawyer for reassurance. Mrs. Wells wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "Ms. Richardson, can you tell us why you left your son 8 years ago?" Lenny's prepared answer was smooth. I was young and overwhelmed. Porter's diagnosis was difficult for me to process, and I wasn't equipped to handle his special needs. I thought it would be best for everyone if he stayed with his grandmother temporarily while I got the help I needed. "How long did you intend this temporary arrangement to last?" I wasn't sure. I thought perhaps a year or two." Mrs. Wells nodded and pulled out a transcript. "Ms. Richardson, I'm going to play an audio recording from approximately 6 months after you left Porter. This is a phone conversation between you and your mother. Please listen carefully." The room filled with Lenny's voice from 8 years ago, the same conversation Porter had first played for us. Her words about feeling like she was in prison, about wanting to start over somewhere she could be normal again, echoed off the conference room walls. Lenny's face went white. That was taken out of context. I was having a difficult day. I was emotional." "Ms. Richardson," Mrs. Wells interrupted, In this recording, you specifically mention wanting to move to California and start over with someone who doesn't know you have a child. How does that align with your testimony that this was meant to be a temporary arrangement? Richard Chen objected, claiming the recording was obtained illegally, but Mrs. Wells was ready for that. The recording was made by a minor child in his own home, documenting conversations that directly affected his welfare. It's completely admissible. The questioning continued for 2 hours. Mrs. Wells methodically played recording after recording, each one more damning than the last. Lenny tried to explain them away, claiming she'd been depressed, that she'd said things she didn't mean, but her explanations became increasingly desperate. The most devastating moment came when Mrs. Wells played the recent recording about putting Porter in a residential facility. "That conversation never happened," Lenny said frantically. "I never said those things." Mrs. Wells looked at her calmly. "Ms. Richardson, are you testifying under oath that this recording is fabricated?" I'm saying it's been edited or taken out of context. The recording will be examined by audio forensics experts. If it's authentic and you've just lied under oath, you understand that constitutes perjury?" Lenny's lawyer called for a break. During the recess, I watched Lenny through the glass partition as she paced frantically in the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear. Porter sat quietly beside me, writing in his notebook. "What are you writing?" I asked. "Just observations," he said, "about how she looks nervous when she lies, but confident when she tells partial truths. It's interesting to watch someone try to manipulate a situation when they don't realize how much evidence exists against them." When the deposition resumed, Mrs. Wells shifted tactics. "Ms. Richardson, how many times have you been married since leaving Porter?" "That's not relevant to. Please answer the question. 3 times. "And how many of those marriages ended due to complications involving children or elderly family members?" Richard Chen objected again, but the judge had already ruled that Lenny's pattern of behavior was relevant to determining her fitness as a parent. "I don't see how my previous marriages—" "Ms. Richardson, did you or did you not leave your second husband when his elderly mother required care in your home?" The questioning continued, methodically exposing every abandonment, every lie, every time Lenny had chosen her own convenience over family obligations. By the time it was over, Lenny looked defeated. But Mrs. Wells wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we'd like to request supervised visitation before any custody decisions are made. We believe it would be illuminating to observe the interaction between Ms. Richardson and her son after 8 years of separation." The judge agreed, and 2 weeks later, the first supervised visit was scheduled. I was required to bring Porter to a family services office where a social worker would monitor their interaction. The drive there was quiet, with Porter staring out the window, lost in thought. "Are you nervous?" I asked. "Not nervous," he said. "Curious. I want to see if she's learned anything about how to talk to me, or if she's still going to treat me like I'm broken." The visitation room was designed to be comfortable but institutional, with soft furniture and children's toys that were too young for Porter. Lenny was already there when we arrived, sitting stiffly on a couch, her hands folded in her lap. "Hi, Porter," she said when he entered the room. "I've missed you so much." Porter sat down across from her, his expression neutral. "What did you miss about me?" The question clearly caught her off guard. What do you mean?" "I mean specifically, what aspects of my personality or our relationship did you miss? What memories did you think about?" Lenny floundered. "I missed everything. Your smile, your laugh. I rarely smiled or laughed when you lived with us," Porter said matter-of-factly. "According to Grandma, I was much more anxious then. So I'm curious about what specific memories you're referring to." I watched through the observation window as Lenny struggled to answer. She clearly hadn't expected Porter to be so direct, so articulate, so impossible to manipulate with vague emotional appeals. "You've changed," she said finally. "Yes, people do that when 8 years pass, especially children. What kind of person did you expect me to become?" I hoped you'd be happy, healthy. I am both of those things. But that happened after you left, not because of anything you did while you were here. The social worker, Ms. Carmen Rodriguez, was taking notes constantly. Lenny seemed to realize the visit wasn't going as planned and shifted strategies. Porter, I know I made mistakes. I was young and scared, and I didn't handle your diagnosis well. But I've grown up now. I've learned about autism, about how to be a better mother. I want to make up for lost time. Porter considered this for a moment. What have you learned about autism? I've read books, articles online. Can you tell me 3 specific strategies that help autistic people manage sensory overload? Lenny looked panicked. Well, there are different techniques. Can you name any of them? The silence stretched on until Ms. Rodriguez intervened, suggesting they try a different activity. For the next 30 minutes, I watched Lenny attempt to connect with Porter using tactics that might have worked with a typical child, but were completely wrong for him. She was too loud, too enthusiastic, too focused on eye contact and physical affection. When Porter stimmed by quietly tapping his fingers on his leg, she told him to stop fidgeting. When he asked detailed questions about her life over the past 8 years, she gave vague, evasive answers. But the most telling moment came near the end of the visit. Porter, Lenny said, her voice taking on a wheedling tone, when this is all settled and we're living together again, we'll need to talk about your inheritance. That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age. I could help you manage it, make sure you don't get taken advantage of. Porter's expression didn't change. What kind of help did you have in mind? Well, I could set up trust funds, investment accounts, make sure the money is handled properly so you'll always be taken care of. And who would control these accounts? I would, of course, as your mother and guardian, but it would all be for your benefit. Porter nodded slowly. That's interesting, because in one of the recordings I have of your phone conversations, you talk about putting me in a residential facility and using the money for yourself. How does that align with your current proposal? The color drained from Lenny's face. What recordings? The ones I've been making for 8 years. The ones where you talk about being glad you don't have to deal with me anymore. The ones where you tell your boyfriends that you're childless. The ones where you admit you only came back because of the money. Ms. Rodriguez was writing furiously now. Lenny looked around the room like a trapped animal. Porter, you don't understand adult conversations. You've misinterpreted. I'm autistic, not stupid, Porter said calmly, and I have an excellent memory for details. Would you like me to quote some of your conversations verbatim? The visit ended shortly after that, with Lenny rushing out of the building and Porter calmly gathering his things. How do you think that went? Ms. Rodriguez asked him. Porter considered the question seriously. I think it went exactly as I expected. She still sees me as something to be managed rather than someone to be loved. She's not interested in who I actually am, just in what I can provide for her. On the drive home, Porter was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Grandma, I used to wonder if I was missing something important by not having a mother. Now I know I'm not. Some people are capable of being parents, and some people just aren't. I'd rather have one person who truly loves me than someone who pretends to love me for money. That night, Mrs. Wells called with news from Ms. Rodriguez's report. It's devastating for their case, she said. The social worker documented multiple instances of inappropriate interaction, lack of understanding of Porter's needs, and what she's calling potential financial manipulation of a minor. Combined with our audio evidence, we have an overwhelming case for permanent guardianship. But I knew Lenny wouldn't give up easily. Desperate people do desperate things, and she was nothing if not desperate. The final battle was yet to come. The final custody hearing was held on a gray Tuesday morning in November. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wooden benches that reminded me more of a chapel than a place where lives were decided. Porter sat beside me, wearing the navy blue suit we'd bought for the occasion, his notebook and a pen in his lap. Judge Margaret Harrison was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd heard every lie and excuse imaginable. She reviewed the case file for several minutes before looking up at the assembled parties. This is a complex case involving parental rights, abandonment, and the best interests of a minor child, she began. I've reviewed all submitted evidence, including audio recordings, social worker reports, and depositions. I'm prepared to hear final arguments. Mrs. Wells stood first, and her presentation was methodical and devastating. She played excerpts from Porter's recordings, read quotes from Ms. Rodriguez's visitation report, and outlined Lenny's pattern of abandoning relationships when they became inconvenient. Your Honor, she concluded, this case is not about a mother who made mistakes and learned from them. This is about an adult who deliberately abandoned her child and only returned when he became financially valuable to her. Porter Hamilton deserves permanency and security with the grandmother who has raised him with love and dedication for 8 years. Richard Chen's argument was desperate and rambling. He tried to claim the recordings were inadmissible, that Lenny's previous marriages were irrelevant, that everyone deserved a second chance at parenthood. But even he seemed to know his case was hopeless. Then Judge Harrison did something unexpected. She asked to speak with Porter directly. Young man, I understand you're 15 years old. You're old enough to have opinions about your own life. Would you like to share your thoughts about this situation? Porter stood up, his movements careful and deliberate. Yes, Your Honor, I would. He walked to the witness stand with more composure than many adults I'd seen in stressful situations. After being sworn in, he folded his hands and looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I have autism, which means I process the world differently than most people. But it doesn't mean I don't understand what's happening here. My biological mother left me 8 years ago because she found my disability inconvenient. She told multiple people over the years that she was glad to be free of me. She presented herself as childless to the men she dated and married. Porter's voice was steady, matter of fact. She only returned when she learned I had inherited money. During our supervised visit, she immediately began discussing how she would control my inheritance. She showed no interest in my education, my friends, my hobbies, or my well-being. She corrected behaviors that are part of how I self-regulate, and she became angry when I asked her direct questions about her absence. Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly. What would you like to see happen, Porter? I would like my grandmother, Maxine Hamilton, to be granted permanent legal guardianship. She's the only parent I've ever really had. She learned how to help me succeed instead of trying to change who I am. She advocates for me, supports my goals, and loves me unconditionally. I don't want to ever be forced to see Lenny Richardson again. And what about the inheritance? That's a significant responsibility. Porter nodded. My grandmother and I have already discussed setting up a trust fund that will ensure my future care and independence. We plan to use some of the money to establish a scholarship fund for other autistic students. The inheritance isn't what matters to me, Your Honor. Having a family that truly wants me is what matters. When Porter returned to his seat, I saw tears in the eyes of several people in the courtroom, including Judge Harrison. The judge called a short recess to review her notes. During the break, I watched Lenny sitting alone at the defendant's table. Richard Chen was on his phone, presumably with other clients who might actually pay their bills. For a moment, Lenny looked very small and very lost. When court resumed, Judge Harrison's voice was firm and clear. I've rarely seen a case where the evidence is so overwhelmingly one-sided. Ms. Richardson, your actions over the past 8 years demonstrate a clear pattern of abandonment and self-interest. The audio recordings submitted as evidence show conclusively that your current custody petition is financially motivated rather than based on genuine concern for your son's welfare. Lenny's face crumpled, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, your behavior during supervised visitation revealed a fundamental lack of understanding of your son's needs and personality. You treated him as an object to be managed rather than a person to be loved and respected. Judge Harrison turned to look at Porter and me. Mr. Hamilton, you are clearly thriving in your grandmother's care. Your articulate testimony today demonstrates the kind of confidence and self-advocacy that comes from being raised in a supportive environment. She picked up her gavel. Therefore, I am granting permanent legal guardianship to Maxine Hamilton. Ms. Richardson's parental rights are hereby terminated. Additionally, I am issuing a restraining order preventing Ms. Richardson from contacting Porter Hamilton directly or indirectly until he reaches the age of 18, at which time he may choose whether to allow contact. The gavel came down with a sound of finality. Lenny let out a choked sob and rushed from the courtroom. Richard Chen gathered his papers and followed her without a word. Mrs. Wells was shaking my hand and congratulating us, but I was focused entirely on Porter. He was sitting very still, his hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead. "Porter, are you okay, sweetheart?" He turned to me, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Really smiled, with his whole face lighting up the way it did when he was genuinely happy. "I'm free," he said simply. "We're both free." 6 months later, Porter and I were sitting in the office of the financial advisor we'd hired to help manage the inheritance. We'd established a trust fund that would provide for Porter's care throughout his life, set up college funds for his future education, and created the scholarship program he'd mentioned in court. The scholarship fund was Porter's idea, and he'd named it the Harold Hamilton Memorial Scholarship for Neurodivergent Students. It would provide financial support for autistic students pursuing higher education, along with funding for accommodations and support services. "It's what Grandpa would have wanted," Porter had explained. "He always said everyone deserves a chance to succeed. They just need the right support." We'd kept one of Harold's classic cars, a 1969 Camaro that Porter particularly loved. The rest of the collection had been sold to fund our new life and the scholarship program. We'd moved to a larger house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a supportive community, but the most important change wasn't financial. It was the peace that came with knowing our family was legally protected and permanent. Porter was thriving in his new school, where his teachers understood his needs and his classmates had come to appreciate his unique perspective. He'd joined the chess club and the computer programming team, finding friendships with other students who valued intelligence and authenticity over social conformity. I'd started volunteering with a local autism advocacy group, sharing our story with other grandparents and relatives who'd found themselves raising autistic children. There was a surprising number of us, and I'd discovered a community of caregivers who understood both the challenges and the profound rewards of loving someone who sees the world differently. One evening, as we sat on our new porch watching the sunset, Porter asked me a question I'd been expecting. "Do you ever wonder what happened to Lenny?" I'd actually kept track, though I hadn't told him. Through Mrs. Wells, I'd learned that Lenny's divorce from James Richardson had been finalized, leaving her with significant debt and no assets. She'd moved back in with her mother in another state and was working as a receptionist at a dental office. Her lawyer, Richard Chen, was facing ethics charges for taking cases he couldn't win on contingency. "I know she's struggling financially," I told Porter honestly, "but she's alive and healthy. That's all I really need to know." Porter nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think I wanted her to suffer the way she made me suffer. But now, I just want her to stay away from us. Some people can't be fixed, and that's not our responsibility." That wisdom, coming from a 16-year-old who'd endured abandonment and fought for his own protection, never ceased to amaze me. "You know," I said, "when you were little and first came to live with me full-time, I worried constantly about whether I was enough, whether I could give you everything you needed." Porter looked at me with those serious dark eyes. "You gave me the most important thing anyone can give a child." "What's that?" "You saw me as I actually am, instead of trying to turn me into someone else. You loved the real me, not some imaginary version of who you thought I should be." As the last light faded from the sky, I reflected on how profoundly our lives had changed. 8 years ago, I'd been a grieving grandmother trying to heal a traumatized child. Today, I was the proud guardian of a remarkable young man who'd taught me as much about courage and resilience as I taught him about love and security. The inheritance had given us financial freedom, but that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that we'd fought for each other and won. We'd proven that real family isn't about biology or legal documents. It's about the choice to stand by someone no matter what challenges arise. Porter was already making plans for college, talking about studying computer science or psychology, maybe both. He wanted to develop technology that would help other autistic people navigate the world more easily. Whatever path he chose, I knew he'd succeed, not because of the money Harold had left him, but because of the strength and intelligence he'd developed through years of being truly loved and supported. That night, as I was turning off the lights and checking the locks, I found a note Porter had left on the kitchen counter. It was written in his careful, precise handwriting. Dear Grandma, thank you for saving me. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for teaching me that being different isn't the same as being broken. I love you. Porter. I held that note for a long time, remembering the terrified little boy who'd watched his mother walk away 8 years ago and marveling at the confident young man he'd become. We'd started this journey in crisis, two people thrown together by circumstances beyond our control. We were ending it as a family, bound not by obligation or legal requirements, but by genuine love and mutual respect. Some inheritances are measured in dollars. Others are measured in the love that passes between generations, the strength that grows from adversity, and the unbreakable bonds forged between people who choose to care for each other unconditionally. Porter and I had both kinds of inheritance now, and we'd earned every bit of both. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.